2 words, get involved.
Welcome to another episode of HFIG Talks, a podcast produced by the Human Factors Interest Group at the University of Toronto. This is Chelsea, HFIG's president, and for this episode, I talked to Dr. Haydee Cuevas about tips for student professional development.
My name is Haydee Cuevas. I'm an associate professor in the College of Aviation at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Prior to joining Embry-Riddle, I worked for over 7 years as a research scientist at SA Technologies. So I've had, one foot in the camp of industry and also in academia. So I can speak from both perspectives. In terms of my research experience, the focus has been on situational awareness, both training and assessment, as well as human automation interaction in complex domains. However, in the past couple of years, my current research has focused on promoting diversity in aviation. As for my passion for mentorship, we could do a whole hour just on that. But I think it's important to create opportunities to promote the success of students as well as early career professionals. So I try also to support my junior colleagues to help them achieve their goals, as well as students, because that's the next generation. If we don't do everything possible to ensure their success, then our field will not be successful.
Definitely. And you wrote a paper on 7 habits of highly effective HFES students, and it had tips for things students can do to set them up for success in the field. And we'll share a link to that article for people who haven't read it. But for those who haven't read it yet, can you give a brief overview of that paper?
Well, first I'll begin by saying I wrote this paper while I was still a graduate student. And I realized how much I benefited from being actively involved as a student member of HFES. So I wanted to share these insights with others because maybe they're wondering, well, I want to get involved, but it's too much work, it's too much time. What can I gain from the time and effort I invest? So in the article, I described scholarship opportunities, such as submitting proposals to the HFES meeting and submitting articles to ergonomics and design, which are more short-term feedback than a journal article to human factors. And I also described the range of networking opportunities available at the conference, as well as the benefits of becoming involved in the technical groups.
And that paper was published in 2003. So I guess, do you have any additional advice or things that you've learned that you would also like to add to that since that paper was published?
Well, the first thing is the HFES bulletin no longer exists. So scratch that advice about submitting contributions to that. But everything else pretty much applies, everything that was in that article. Now, having been a working professional for several years, what I would add to that is stay current with the latest technological developments and research trends. Stay up to date with what's going on in the world around you. What is the current research? Where are the areas where gaps are ready to be explored? On the flip side of that, also be open to learning about areas outside of your specific interest. Don't put on the blinders and say, no, I'm only going to look at trust and automation, because you don't know other areas of research, how important they may be to support your research in trust and automation. When you think of social psychology and how human trust develops, as artificial intelligence evolves and becomes more involved, we're going to have to leverage from those findings in social psychology to infuse developing artificial intelligence that capitalize on how humans interact with other humans. And then the other sort of words of wisdom I would share if I wrote that article now is seek out opportunities. Don't wait for opportunity to come knocking at your door. Be proactive, seek those out, and be willing to take risks. Now is the time while you're a student to take risks. Don't view things as failures, view things as opportunities to learn and grow.
Another thing you mentioned was that, you know, becoming an HFES student member gives you access to this network of students and professionals and experts in the field. So as you said, one thing is for students to kind of put themselves out there, make those connections, don't be afraid. So do you have any tips for students who want to kind of start that process and build their network within the HFES community?
Oh, absolutely. 2 words, get involved. As I mentioned in the paper, being an active member is not a spectator sport. You have to be an active participant. Join your student chapter, the local chapter, the technical groups. HFES now has started affinity groups, which are more opportunities for people with common interest to get together, like the HFE Woman is an example of an affinity group. If you wonder, why don't we have an affinity group on fill in the blank? Go out there, talk to people, see if there's interest and start one. Be a pioneer, don't just wait for somebody else to solve the problems for you. When attending a social event at a conference, make an effort to interact with others who are not from your program or university. Every time I attended the opening gala reception, all my fellow students were sitting at a table with everybody else from their program, and I would go up there, what are you doing? You can see and talk to each other back home. Here's some people from Australia. Here's some people from New Zealand. Here's from people in Nigeria. Go meet them, talk to them, find out what their interests. We are a global community. Don't be so micro in your local community. Same thing for the technical sessions. Attend seminars and lectures that are not directly related to your field of interest. I was as guilty of this when I was a student. Oh, well, I'm interested in aviation, so I only go to the aerospace systems technical group. No, if something piques your interest, one of my favorite examples, I can't remember his last name now, but he goes by Deke. He was talking about canine human factors. And I'm like, canine human factors? I'm not doing research in this. My dissertation is not going to be about this, but I'm intrigued. And so I went, and it was arguably the best, most interesting and informative paper at the whole meeting. He was talking about how we could learn about working dogs and how they're trained and how they developed expertise and skills in doing what they do, like German Shepherds, search and rescue, or drug enforcement. We could then see what we can leverage from that to build expertise in humans. And it was Helton, Helton. But I would not have gone to that had I not open my opportunities to let me learn about something new. And then when you go to these sessions, talk to others about their work, but not all talk, listen. Don't, I talk a lot, so it's really hard for me, but I have to remind myself, okay, you said enough, stop, now listen.
Well, you never know, right, what you're gonna learn from a talk, even if you think it's not relevant to yours. There's always things that you can find and kind of apply to what you're doing. Or you'll never know, like one day in the future, something might come up where that talk is like, oh, that's actually relevant here. I can use something from that. And I think, I mean, we spend this time becoming an expert in one very specific thing, but that doesn't mean that's the only one specific thing you're going to be doing. So it's good to get experience in different things so that you can use that knowledge and say, you know, oh, well, I do know a little bit about this as well. So yes, I can help with that project and stuff like
And it
that.
makes you more marketable.
Yeah.
Because the chances of finding a job description that only wants you to know about one thing is you have a better opportunity of winning Powerball.
Yeah.
The more broad focus, have an expertise, establish your niche, but also demonstrate expertise that's more well-rounded.
Definitely. And going back to your comment about your lab, so I think I'm probably guilty, and many grad students are guilty of this as well. You're kind of comfortable with the people that you know. So when you're at a conference, you kind of stick with them for comfort. But I guess this is your opportunity to meet people otherwise you would not meet. So what's your tip for initiating conversations with people, or is it just go for it and don't be scared?
It's scary. And that'll be a great segue to talk about mentorship opportunities at HFES. So when I was a student, I'm pretty resilient, but I remember being so happy to be at the conference and wanting to meet all these rock stars. And I'd go and, hello, I'm your biggest fan. And more often than not, the professionals were flattered and were open, but occasionally I would get the, oh, nice, thank you, and then continue on with their conversation. Or I even had one in particular that I will always remember that said, excuse me, young lady, but we're having an important discussion right now. Could you go away? And that would be devastating. That would be crushing to a new student that's trying to get out there. So I said, you know what? I'm going to fix this. And that's when I got the idea for the HFES mentor-mentee luncheons. I decided that the opening gala was too overwhelming. So let me organize, host, and sponsor these informal luncheons, because again, I like feeding students, that happen during the meeting, but the mentors that sign up to attend the luncheons want to be there. They're eager to talk to students. And then the students would sign up for these luncheons and they would have the opportunity, unstructured discussion. I would try to match them up with either areas of research interest or where they were in graduate school. You know, first year, I'm trying to get ideas. You know, third year, I'm working on my dissertation. Fourth year, internship and career opportunities. Should I go into industry or academia or government? So I would try to match them up, but then I would force them to leave the table and rotate and meet with the other mentors. And I started that in 2005. And I think they did it virtually last year.
Yeah, I went and it was the highlight of the HFES for me, even though it was virtual.
Yeah, and I have mentors, very important, accomplished people who have so many other things they could be doing. have reached out to me and contacted me and says, hey, are you doing the mentor-mentee luncheons this year? Because please sign me up. This is arguably the most important event that I attend at the meeting. Oh, and little word to the wise, some companies go there when they're hiring because they want to get to know the students more informally rather than the nervousness that you have at the Career Center. And if you can indulge me for a minute, I'll tell you a story. One of my first mentees in the first cohort that I did this in 2005 was Christy Bowerly Schmidt, who was a graduate student. And she was wonderful. She was great. And then she came back years later, now as the human factors person at Apple. And she contacted me, and she had attended, subsequent years as well. And she says, hey, I've been asked to hire some new people for our division. Can I come to your lunch and meet the students? Let me just say hers was the most popular table at the luncheon. But imagine, and we'll get to this if we have time to talk about that. Imagine if you were sitting at that table and you were a fellow graduate student and you got to meet Christy, and she's, like I said, she's just awesome and wonderful. But wouldn't it be great if when you're both graduated and now she's on the hiring side and you're like, hey, Christy, remember me? We met at HFES 2005. Wow, you're at Apple. Tell me about, and now it's a face, it's a known entity, which really goes a long way to opening those doors.
Yeah, definitely. So you said that started in 2005. Were you still a student at that time?
I had just graduated. I graduated in 2004, and I finally got a real paycheck again, the one that has real zeros behind it. And so I decided I need to give back. And I'll repeat that later on in our talk, but I need to give back. What did I see missing when I was a student that I would like to create opportunities for the next generation of students? And so I got permission from HFES to do this. And every year it is just, the response is so positive.
Yeah, like I said, it was my favorite part of HFES. And outside of the mentor-mentee luncheon, do you have any other tips for students who are looking for mentors? So how do you identify an appropriate mentor or kind of initiate that relationship?
First, it begins with identifying in what areas would you benefit from mentorship. Is it navigating graduate school? Is it trying to decide on a career path? Is it balancing your personal and professional obligations? Because we're not just students, we have other commitments, families, work, all these other service commitments that we have. How do we balance that? How do we balance developing ourselves as professionals while also taking care of ourselves as individuals? Then once you have sort of, here are the things that I would benefit from mentorship, then seek out individuals that can provide that type of support. But first, learn more about them before initiating contact. And then also look beyond HFES, explore mentorship opportunities in other professional organizations and in your local communities. While a student is the best time to do that because the fees for student membership are reasonably low. I was a member of about half a dozen organizations while I was a student. It was sort of like the buffet of, let me see, where do I want to grow up as a professional? And then when I graduated, now the fees skyrocket. And so then I was selective, and I only stayed a member with those organizations in which I was actively involved. And that's how I ended up just putting all my energy into HFES. But also think beyond the traditional professional student mentoring relationships. Peer mentors are equally valuable, as who better to understand the challenges you are facing than another student dealing with the same issues. So, a first year student, partnering up with, an advanced student who says, do not take systems engineering with operations research. You will have no life. Balancing your workload, or do not take this class until you've taken this other class, because this person assumes you know all about this, research qualitative methods or something like that. Where to find good food, what websites offer the cheapest books. I mean, those seems like little mundane things, but it can go a long way to smoothing the transition into graduate school. And then when you're looking, for dissertation ideas or dissertation chairs or members of your committee, talk to other students. If you have a particular faculty in mind, talk to students who have that faculty as your chair. And it's not about favoritism, but if a faculty is a micromanager and you prefer a more hands-off, then it probably won't work very well. And if you're completely new to research and you need a little more hand-holding, then pairing up with a faculty member who's just part of the Socratic method and is hands-off, then that probably won't work well for you. But you won't know that until you talk to others and find out about that individual. And also think of mentorship as career lifelong relationships. Mentorship is valuable at all stages of your professional development, both in graduate school and then when you embark on your career. I had mentors in graduate school, and I also, when I graduated, I established mentoring relationships with professionals to help me succeed.
One of the other things, I actually came across another article that you wrote or co-wrote more recently on, I think it was called a board of directors, like having multiple mentors.
Yes. Oh, you must have been reading my notes. So Katie Mullins, who is a colleague here at Embry-Riddle University, she and I collaborated on a paper in 2018. I'd be happy to share the paper as well as all the supplemental materials that she prepared for that workshop. And the take-home message of that was, don't rely on just one mentor. Build your personal board of directors, because you have different mentorship needs, and asking one person to fill all of that is unfair and it's not likely to be successful. So when you're looking for a mentor, think that it doesn't necessarily have to match your research interest perfectly. So I only want a mentor that does trust and automation. And I picked that topic because that's a very popular topic when I was in graduate school. What matters most is their willingness to offer useful advice, to provide guidance and support based on their own personal and professional experiences to help you achieve your educational and career goals. I will give one personal example. My academic advisee, who's now a doctor, she just defended, last week, she was a new mom. I don't have children. I could try to think of what advice to give her to balance having a newborn and trying to take classes and trying to be successful in your research, but I can't talk from that place of experience. And so I connected her with colleague who coincidentally turned out to be her, in the end, her dissertation chair, who was young, had children while in graduate school, while also working at Embry-Riddle, and she could relate to those challenges much better than I did. And even though their research interests weren't aligned, but she helped fill that niche, and then she could, the chair could reach out to other faculty for the domain expertise. But that social support, that insider, yeah, I've been there, done that. I know what it is being a young mom trying to raise 2 toddlers while finishing graduate school, while trying to do research. She could relate to that. So I think that comes across in that Mullins and Cuevas paper. Another resource that I will share with you to disseminate among your audience is the paper that was written to summarize the mentoring game activity that was held at HFES 2017. The mentoring game followed the same approach as the TV game show, the dating game. And here we had 3 mentee interview mentor contestants, asking them some serious questions and some funny questions, but to get insights, would be a good match. And then at the end of the Q&A, they picked them and they were off and running with a Starbucks gift card to continue the conversation. And I'm happy to report that the last time I followed up with those pairs, they were still supporting each other, and the mentors were still actively involved in the mentees' careers.
And I think that speaks to, there's a lot of people in the HFES community who are very willing to be mentors and active mentors to kind of continue to support students who are looking for mentorship. If you were going to give, or students are going to do one thing to aid their professional development, so one step they can take, or first step they can take after listening to this podcast, what would be your recommendation?
2 words: get involved. It's not a spectator sport. Get involved, but focus, don't just focus on what you're getting out of your involvement. Focus on how you can contribute to your profession. I learned that very early on when I was in graduate school, that the more I gave to the HFES, the more I benefited from the rewards, because I could see that I was affecting change. When I was a student going to conferences, I realized if my lab wasn't paying for this, no way could I go to this conference and afford the $300 a night hotel rooms. So still as a student, I requested permission to coordinate the student roommate matching service that would help pair students up who wanted to share rooms if they happen to be the only one coming from their program. And that did not serve a whole lot of students, but it served enough students that it made it feasible for them to attend the conference, especially for our international colleagues. And it, going back to my earlier comment, you know, don't be afraid to hang out with people who are not from your lab or your program. And this is a great way to do that. So that's one. Get involved, focus on what you can get out of it. If you see a problem, don't just complain about it. Generate a solution. Then go to leadership and saying, hey, we don't have fill in the blank. Here's my idea for how we can address that gap. May I have your support and show interest in that. The student, as another example, the Student Career and Professional Development Day never existed. It came into fruition because Dr. Anthony Andre was concerned that students who could not afford to stay at the conference hotel had nowhere to relax and rest in between sessions. And so he pushed to get the student lounge. And then they say, well, what about Monday? Students can't afford to attend the workshops, even at the student register. What can we do to capitalize on Monday to get our students to come in early and benefit without having to compete with the technical sessions? And so these are all gaps, things that were missing that somebody said, you know what, we can fix this.
And I will say they are very receptive and wanting to hear student ideas. So I was at the Student Professional Development Day at the 2020 virtual meeting, and there was a session with like the current, past, and future president of HFES, and they came and they wanted to know, what else can we do to support students? So if there is something you think that could benefit yourself and other students, say it. And the worst that could happen is maybe it doesn't end up working out, but best case scenario, they'll hear that opinion and say, you know what, yeah, that's a really great idea. We should try and do that.
Well, and also be persistent. It might be, okay, this is not the right time, but keep asking. And eventually the society will come around. So don't give up.
Good advice. We did ask some of our student members if they had any questions about student professional development. One of the questions that we got was, what would you recommend for students who want to develop their own mentorship skills and become a better mentor to undergraduates or to newer graduate students?
The best advice that I can give is to listen openly and without judgment. Also, do not try to fix your mentee or solve their problem. Rather, provide them support and guidance to meet and overcome these challenges. The Mullins and Cuevas paper provides some very useful insights on that. And also the HFES bulletin article by Moon, which summarizes the mentoring game, provides a lot of useful tips on that. In the Mullins and Cuevas paper, she put forward to our participants a reflective activity where they were asked, what are your strengths? What could you contribute? Are you a stats guru? Then maybe help undergraduates or your fellow graduate students who are struggling with, conducting a structural equation model for this class. Provide that guidance. My sort of challenge was linear algebra. No matter how many times the professor explained it, it was like deer in the headlights. And my two fellow students who were in my cohort sat me down in our student lounge and just kept giving example and trying it this way and trying it that way. And then all of a sudden the light bulb went off and I'm like, oh my goodness, why couldn't I see that before? So identifying your strengths, also being honest with oneself about your commitment. Don't make a commitment to mentor someone if you're not going to be able to deliver on that commitment. It might sound really great. Oh, I can mentor, these undergraduate research lab team. But if you're not going to be available when they need you, then you're not doing them a good service. So identify your strengths, determine how much time and effort you can commit, and then listen openly and without judgment, and also be open to learning from them, because as you're providing them mentorship and guidance, you are also learning and growing yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. And one other question we got was, how can students engage or volunteer with HFES throughout the year outside of the annual meeting?
Join and actively participate in your student chapter, your local chapter, technical groups, affinity groups, like I mentioned earlier. If you don't see one that's a good match for you, start one. Find out if others also have this interest. And also inquire about volunteer opportunities on HFES subcommittees. HFES is a volunteer-driven organization. Without our volunteers, nothing gets done. The only people that get paid are the association management company that does the administrative. But everything else, from the journal, the editor-in-chief, the reviewers, the president, the secretary treasurer, the members at large, all the subcommittees, all those are volunteer. And so they're always looking for support and interested and motivated students, and it's a win-win. They get to achieve the objectives of HFES, and not just HFES. Don't tell them I told you though, but go to other organizations. If you're interested in usability, go to the Usability Professionals Association. If you're interested in human-computer interaction, look at CHI. Also look in your local community. Don't restrict yourself just to professional organizations. One of the things that I was part of that I'm most proud of is I work with Dr. Ron Shapiro, who's retired from IBM, in establishing National Ergonomics Month. I don't know if that's still active, but the idea is we would challenge our members, local chapters and student chapters, to organize action plans to bring ergonomics to their communities. That could be doing workshops at schools, grade schools, high schools, to get them thinking of human factors. We had another student chapter that did human factors ergonomics evaluation of a mayor's office to see, if the setup of the workspace was ergonomically designed. We had another student chapter that went out to Habitat for Humanity and did an evaluation in terms of how to ensure that volunteers were able to perform their task in a safe manner. And they generated, after their observations and interviews, they generated a list of guidelines that they shared with Habitat for Humanity to ensure the safety and well-being of their volunteers.
That's really cool. Any final thoughts or advice that you want to share with students?
I will close with some insights I have gained from my mentorship, both being a mentor and a mentee. over these many years. This also applies to your dissertation chair, but also your mentors. And when you're a mentor as well, as you move on in your career, always remember the 5 C's. The 5 C's are critic, to provide constructive feedback; coach, to provide guidance in how to address those gaps; confidant, to be available for your mentee, to have a safe space to share their vulnerabilities, their frustrations; cheerleader, to ensure that, yes, you can do that. Yes, I know it's a challenge. I know you got rejected for the 3rd time, but we can do this. We'll get there. And then champion. You have the duty to champion for your mentee and for your student. And that is very important, because we all need someone who not only believes in us, but will also go to bat for us to ensure that our voice is heard and that we are respected. So 5 C's: critic, coach, confidant, cheerleader, and champion.
Perfect way to end. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you again to Dr. Cuevas for the great discussion. And thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying the podcast, and stay tuned for more episodes of HFIG Talks coming soon.